School committee's chair, you really want the city council to stay in its lane a little bit and let the school committee run its affairs, and I think I think as a rule, we try to be very respectful for that. But we do have a role, not only with buildings, but to be supportive generally. And I think we've all, I really think I can speak for every one of us that we've demonstrated that consistently because the schools are so important to us.
I have had my hand slapped and been reprimanded numerous times by other elected officials in the city for getting involved in my local elementary school. I live now near the Franklin School, and there was an air quality problem and an asbestos problem, and the playground was a wreck, and the sidewalk paving was crumbling, and I tried to get involved to bring together the Department of Public Works, School Department, School Committee, and I view our schools as community assets. Like, the families who have kids in school are also residents, and they vote and they care, and I think that there should be more connection, even though our responsibilities are definitely separate. I think we can and should have a role in uniting school and city side things as much as we can. During COVID, one of the things we could do was advocate for better air quality in the schools so that all the schools could be opened again. That was something that the city council could have a role in and did. So I don't like the separation and the siloing as much as happens right now.
And I'll just add that as chair of public facilities, I'm just going to follow up on Mark's comments about the schools. Right now we're working on building a new school. The Lincoln Elliott School will be moving to 150 Jackson Road. It's like a new campus, and I've been going to those meetings. So the city council has a lot of overview on the planning, on all those decisions, along with design review and community input. So we do have a big role in those schools, and we have built, this will be the fourth new school we've built on, and all the other three have been on time and under budget. I'm proud to say we do a great job building in schools.
And along with the schools, what are some of the other important issues that the City Council is looking to address?
So one of my important issues over the years has been affordable housing and housing in general. And we don't have a committee per se that addresses housing, which perhaps we should have such a committee, but we don't. But there are ways certainly through the special permit process, that we do approve projects, large projects that have come in. You've probably seen the Austin Street project and the new plaza that's been created there. That came through the city council. And then there are two other larger ones that haven't been built yet, one on Needham Street and one by the Riverside Station at the T. So we've had a little bit of success in recent years in getting some housing built. One of the things that we just passed as a city council is a new affordable housing trust. So a group of I think it's six members we have just been appointed, and their job will be to foster affordable housing in Newton. You're probably aware that the cost of housing is skyrocketing, not just in Newton, but all over the country. And part of the reason for that is that there just simply isn't enough housing, which is one other thing that I'll talk about, and that's the zoning and planning. We do have a zoning and planning committee. The zoning and planning committee sets rules for what can be built where in the city. So how will the land be used? Where can housing be? Where can single family housing be? Where can multi-family housing be? Where can commercial be? All of those rules are set by the ordinance in the zoning and planning committee. And what we are trying to do in that committee is figure out how can we loosen the rules in the zoning and planning committee so that it's easier to build affordable housing in Newton. And this is, again, not a problem just in Newton. This is a national problem. And if you ask the national housing advocates what's the biggest problem in housing, it's that local communities set zoning rules that are so strict that it's very, very difficult to build housing. So if you ever want to get involved in housing, I'd be thrilled.
So I actually wrote down what I thought were some of the biggest priorities. I didn't want to forget something. Obviously, housing is really important, and I do support building multifamily housing, especially around village centers and areas where people are less dependent on cars and where there's more amenities. I've also been very involved in investing in our playing fields, adding new lights, because we don't have enough of them, and we're really desperate for them. So I've been involved in that. Zoning reform is key, and not only for all the reasons that Susan just mentioned, but I would also say there's huge opportunities for us to do more climate-friendly initiatives, reduce heat island effects, encourage more biking and walking, make us less car dependent, and other things. And then one of the things I also am especially interested in is trash and recycling. And I'm wondering if anyone here knows where your trash goes.
We all do that.
It gets burned in the Middlebury Waste Energy incinerator up the Mass Pike. And costs are going up, and landfill space is dwindling, and we're already shipping our trash to other states, which can someday say, we don't want your trash anymore. I could go on about that for a while, but I think it's really important because it's going to cost us a lot more going forward. We have to be more efficient with our resources. And I'm very proud that we just passed a new stormwater to keep the Charles River cleaner. And it also is a requirement at the federal level to meet our NICDs and MS4 stormwater permits.
Thank you. So I start my approach to local government with trying to work as hard as I can to make sure that we do the basics really well. And what are the basics in local government? Well, they're educating our kids, making sure that we're a safe community, both from policing and fire perspective, making sure that we have sound public libraries, working hard to improve our streets, sidewalks, bike paths, any modes of transportation, making sure our water and sewer systems and stormwater systems function properly. That, to me, is the essence of local government. We can combine that, and should combine that, with broader goals about addressing climate change practices when it comes to waste management, stormwater. But those are the very essence of, in my mind, what we should and need to be focusing on as a local government. It doesn't mean ignoring what are national or even international issues. Indeed, those can come into play often in what the decisions we make on a very local level, but that's where we start. From a zoning and a land use perspective, I probably have a somewhat different view than Susan and perhaps Allison, and I suspect Andrea does. But the zoning code, where we do agree, is that the zoning code is extremely important. And the zoning code, which is arcane and seemingly difficult, it kind of sets the rules, like what can you build in Newtonville? What should you be able to build in Newtonville? And what should you be able to do, and how can you do it without adversely affecting your next door neighbor? And those are, I think, very difficult questions that we grapple with as we try to address our zoning code. How do we encourage businesses to be in the city, for example? How do we encourage more housing near transit, and yet do it in a way that makes sense, that respects the folks who are already there, and really think very thoughtfully? The last thing we do, as Susan said, is a much more reactive thing, which is a special permit process when we approve large projects, typically large projects. And there, some developer comes in and says, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to build. And the city council works with that developer, challenges that developer, and hopefully at the end of the day, we usually approve almost every project, but we make it into a much better project. And that's really, in my mind, the primary mission. The last thing that we do as city councilors is constituent services, and I don't want to lose sight of that. Folks will call up and say, you know, the street light on my street has been out for 6 months now. I've called City Hall and I haven't got an answer. And I think all of us on multiple occasions have picked up the phone or sent a quick email off to try to get the problem resolved. And that's also part of our job.
And that's often more effective than the 311 system that they tell us to tell everybody to call. because I always get the microphone last, I feel like I just do like a little wrap up with a micro scale. So I'm thinking about other things that we do that are much smaller. Zoning and land use are things that I care about, but I've been told that those are terms that make everybody glaze over in boredom. And other colleagues have talked about it, but it kind of sets along with our ordinance, the rules and the guidance for the whole city. We have, for instance, put into place just this winter an ordinance against discharging, shooting air guns in Newton. Something I never thought about before December. I didn't know anything about pellet guns and air guns or how they could be dangerous in the backyard. So we look at things like that and it comes up unexpectedly. Another thing that Susan and I have been working on is the winter parking ban. Some of you might notice that you can't leave your or your parents' cars on the streets in the winter. It sounds like a small thing, but those are issues that we take a look at too. What's going to happen to the Gath pool? How's that going to go forward? Are we also going to look at a year-round pool to accommodate, a larger section of Newton's population? So it's, again, from micro to macro. I think that the most macro level for me is where climate change intersects with housing and transportation. Many people don't want density. They don't want to build more housing. But it turns out that if you build it densely, it's more environmentally productive and constructive. So how we look at all that, how close is it to public transportation? What's our regional need to do both the transportation and the climate change and the housing thing? So we're putting all these things together on a daily basis. And it's fun, there's a lot going on.
Just on the way back, I want to give you some nitty-gritty examples of those. We gave you the big topics, but there are things like double poles. I don't know if you've noticed, but the telephone poles, when they start to lean. So the telephone company comes and puts a new pole in, but there's all these wires attached to the old one, and sometimes it can take years to get all the wires off of the old poles onto the new pole. So we have streets full of double poles which look ugly. So this is not, earth-shattering stuff, but it's important to the way our community looks. Another thing to do with poles is I was on a committee years ago called Undergrounding, and it had to do with getting rid of the telephone poles and burying the wires. And I know Mark and I are very involved in that project. So you can't imagine how difficult it is to get rid of the poles and underground the wires. And I was going to mention the winter parking because Haruka, right here in the room, we got 500 emails about the winter parking ban this past winter. And we gave them all to Haruka. She did a data analysis and built a database for us. And it was an amazing piece of work, which gave us all the information about how people feel about the winter parking ban all over the city. Who's for it, who's against it, and what are the reasons, and where do they live? It was an amazing piece of work. And we just talked today about docketing something next month that's going to be using that data. And one other thing that I wanted to mention is the Newton Cemetery. The beautiful cemetery in the middle of the city. So their job is to find a final burial place for people. And right now they want to open up their last plot of land for burial, because that's the last piece of land they have available to bury people that want to be buried there. And to do that, they want to tear down some trees, because the trees are in the way of where the plots would be. But there's a tree ordinance in Newton, and the tree ordinance says you can't tear down the trees without paying the money into the fund. And the cemetery is not a very rich business. They don't make a lot of money, and so there's a problem here. They want to have burial. Newton people want a place to bury their family members, but the tree ordinance says, no, not unless you pay us X hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that's often what we have to do, is balance needs of one group against another. And that's a lot of what you get involved on in the city council. Next time you're gonna go first.
And we would just like to remind our audience members that we have a QR code that you can go to Google Form and ask questions to the city councilors, which they will be answering at the end. Also, I
know in the middle, there's a lot of QR codes, like at your feet. I don't know about on the sides. There might be some on like the first couple rows, but we did not have enough. So we have these ones down here.
And so anyone can take this. What is your specific role on the city council, and are there any special committees that you are a part of?
We all have special roles. Every city councilor is assigned to 2 committees of the working committees. Each committee is made up of 1 city councilor from each ward. I am on the land use committee. That's not a term that makes me glaze over. I'm a landscape architect and site planner by profession, so I was really excited to be on the land use committee, and I'm the vice chair of that. I'm also on the public facilities committee, which Allison chairs, and that's about our infrastructure mainly. She can probably talk more about it because she chairs it. But I'm somebody who really likes hearing about how to repair the asphalt this year. And I actually sit on all 3 committees with Councilor Laredo. I'm also on the real property reuse committee, which looks at any city-owned property that is about to be reused or sold or repurposed. So I'm on those 3 committees. Everyone is on 2, and some of us are on 3.
So I have to say, when I first got on the land use committee, my first couple of years in the city council, I couldn't believe how tedious it was. The meetings would go on forever. There was a lot of detail, and I couldn't really understand why it mattered so much. But now, having served there actually my entire tenure on the city council, I've really come to appreciate the work that it does. That committee, it sets what the city looks like in so many ways and has such an important influence in whether it's a single individual homeowner wanting to change what their house looks like, to a large project like Northland or Trio or Austin Street, and being able to shape that in a positive way is incredibly rewarding. I gotta say, we're all kind of nerdy on the city council, if you want to know the truth. I mean, we're the only people who care about like where our waste goes and what the sewage system looks like, but we do care about it, and I'm sure Alice will talk more about public facilities, but public facilities is all about buildings and roads and infrastructure. And that's actually really, really important because it makes such a huge difference to every single resident of the city is affected by the work of that community.
So I serve on 2 committees. I chair public facilities, and I also serve on zoning and planning, which is another really critical committee that has been very busy this year. And public facilities, also, as I mentioned, we also oversee the building department, which includes the schools, and there's 84 buildings, municipal and school buildings in the city. And DPW, I mean, DPW buildings, but I'll talk about DPW first. I mean, we are responsible for the maintenance of the streets, so you can imagine the complaints we get, right? And boy, if someone's trash and recycling doesn't get picked up, we certainly hear about it. So we all have a role. I would say one of the great things about having a 24 city level of expertise to the committee, and we have a lot of information that we can share and educate each other on. So I learn a lot from my colleagues on that as well. But I really enjoy what I do, and I am really down and dirty with trash and recycling, and stormwater is another one that I really enjoy. Thank you.
So I'll just say that Andrea is the vice chair of land use, Mark is the chair of real property reuse, and you just said that you're the chair of public facilities. So I serve on the Programs and Services Committee, which we haven't talked about much, and that's the committee actually that if there is an issue with the schools, it goes to the Programs and Services Committee. And I also serve on the Zoning and Planning Committee. I served for years on the Land Use Committee, and I loved that committee. I hated to leave it, but my colleague from Ward 2 left Zoning and Planning, so I had to go there. Right now, I'm serving as the president of the City Council, and that doesn't mean that my vote is any better than the other 23 other votes. But the president of the City Council gets to pick who are the chairs of the committees, and sort of just manage the council and manage the council's work. And it's much more time-consuming job than I thought it was going to be. I'll tell you that. They say it's a part-time job.
All right, so now we have just a question, pretty general. What advice do you have for students that want to become more civically engaged and who want to participate in city government and youth?
So the thing that's most important is to really learn what it is your passion is. And then once you figure that out, study it, learn it inside out so that you can explain to somebody else what the issues are and what the problems are and what you're trying to do. And I spoke last week with a group at Brown Middle School who wanted to know civic action, what can they do with the schools. And by the end of it, what we really got involved with was school lunch. They think school lunch is horrible, and I gave them advice about what to do. I said, it's not enough for you guys in your classroom to talk to each other about how bad school lunch is. You have to study it, you have to learn it, you have to make other people aware of it, invite elected officials to come and have lunch with you. You have to make a plan for how to get people involved. So it's all about working on the ground to get other people involved and feel the same way you do. That's what civic action is all about.
I think there's nothing more important than service to your community, and a great way to start is to volunteer or do an internship. Work with your city councilor. There's a lot of great boards and commissions in the city as well. I mentioned I got started with Green Newton. I got involved in my PTO. I joined the Newton Conservators, and I really followed my passion and things that interested me. So I would say follow your passion and ask questions and get involved.
So I think the opportunity to give back is both rewarding and beneficial to the community, and actually very beneficial to each of you individually. I know that when I do this work, even after a long and yet another long and yet another long meeting, at the end of the day, when you reflect on it, you're like, wow, I did something that was good, and that is a feeling of satisfaction. It's very personal rewarding. So how do you do that? Find what you're interested in. It can be the environment, it can be biking, it can be conservation, it can be anything. It can be a political candidate on any side of the spectrum. And get involved. Get involved. Volunteer. Volunteer for we have lots and lots of community groups. Some are advocacy groups, some are just designed to make Newton a better place, like Newton Community Pride. And there's an array of things you can do, but get involved and find something you like to do, and then do it, and then do more of it, and then do more of it. And I will assure you that it will be very rewarding for you individually.
Well, they all said it, right? I think middle school and high school is a great time to start to get into this sort of thing. Clubs and courses that talk about civics and next generation stuff are ways of doing it. Again, it can be volunteer, it can be interning, paid or not, usually not. But what you learn, you'll bring back to it, and then, like, for me, it just continued to lead me down other paths and other directions. So I would like to see people age 16 plus be able to vote in Newton. There's a group of us who's working on that. The more ways you can get involved in whatever topics you're interested in with people that you like and with people that you don't know that then you might turn out to like too. And I look forward to seeing you all in the future.
All right, so our next question is, how can people share their thoughts with city council members? We can start at Andrea this time. How can people share their thoughts with the city council?
Yeah, so like how can people get in contact with city council members if there's anything like questions or comments that they want the city council to be able to see?
It's actually easy. You can reach all of us at citycouncil@newtonma.gov, and that goes to all 24 counselors. And each of us has an email address. It's generally our first initial last name. I'm A. Kelly, K-E-L-L-E-Y, @newtonma.gov. We also all have, it's available on the city website, phone number, contact. We, as Allison mentioned and Susan earlier, we get a lot of emails from people. We also hear testimony at public meetings and public hearings, in person and in Zoom. If you want to say something publicly, you can do that. If you want to call us or email us, we're actually very easy to reach, individually and as a group. Anyone follow up?
You know, we are so easy to reach. I mean, the email obviously is instantaneous. We all have phones that we respond to. I think every one of us is happy to meet with individuals or groups in person or over Zoom if that's preferable. And if there's an issue where you want to speak publicly, you can certainly attend any city council meeting where there's public comment. Not everyone has public comment. And speak, and there's always an opportunity to write to us about any particular issue. I will say, I think unanimously, we all strive to be very accessible to residents. The other thing is people can bump into us at the supermarket, the library, a million other places, and they do, and they offer their opinions, and that's part of the job as well.
And I believe all our phone numbers are online as well. And I especially enjoy meeting with constituents in person over coffee locally. Cafe Nero is one of my spots I like to go to. So happy to meet with anybody at any convenient time.
I think they said it all.
All right, one more question in this section. What is an easy way for young people, especially at the high school level, who many of them can't vote? What is an easy way or what are some ways for them to get involved with city government? And how do you recommend people engage with the city government if they're not at voting age yet?
Well, I think we actually kind of talked about it before, but you can, if there's a topic you're interested in, there's generally a group of city councilors who are interested in it too. If we're working on changing things, if you have an idea about how things can change, you can talk with us. You can come to a meeting, you can meet with us individually. I work on the effort towards the youth vote too. I just like more teenagers to be able to vote in municipal elections. Not everyone agrees with me about that. But the more you prepare as young people, young adults, the more you'll be ready to start voting when you're 18, unless we change the law before then.
Yeah, I think a lot of this was said previously. I mean, there are so many ways to get involved, and you know, whether it's joining an organization, being involved in a political campaign, those are two very obvious ways of really having an impact. And if you're passionate about an issue or you're concerned about an issue, just reach out to us. I think any one of us, I certainly will be happy to talk or meet with anyone at any time.
Well, remember that you're all future voters, and a lot of what we do on the city council has to do with our future, and so it's really important that we hear from you. And there's nothing more important than an educated, engaged voter. So anyone who wants to start in high school, I commend you for looking ahead, because your voice is important.
You know, remember I told you about Haruka? Well, the way we met Haruka was because, as I believe you volunteered for one of the people running for city council. So every 2 years, there's a lot of opportunity to to help somebody who's running for city council. You can get involved that way, and you know, you can talk to one of us and we can tell you who's running, and you can get in touch with them. But just reach out to, on the city's website, you can see who the candidates are. And you can go look at their websites and see if you believe in their same things that they believe in, and they need the help. They'd love to have the help. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there's a youth commission. I don't know if you're aware of that. There's the mayor appoints members to the youth commission every year. This morning was the mayor's community breakfast, and 2 members of the youth commission spoke about how important it is for the future for youth to speak out. And so the Youth Commission is another group that's your age and your ideas, you know, your same perspective on life, and go talk to them about it as well.
All right, so now we're going to move on to our Q&A, so questions from everyone in here. We can, I can take one of these and hold it up to some of the people on the sides if they have any questions. So we can start off with, thank you, Olivia. We can start off with,
All right, we're gonna start with our student questions with, how do you balance a job with being a city council member?
So, my day job is in information technology, and it was tough, to tell you the truth. It's tough to balance it. For 26 years, I was at Tufts Medical School working on a very demanding IT project that brought me all over the world traveling because of it. But somehow or other, you can make it work. Of course, now I'm retired from that job. I started my own company, and it's much easier, and I have much more time. But you just do the best you can. And when you're at your day job and you're on the phone talking about city work, you try and not let anybody hear you or know what's going on.
It just limits how much I can do with the day job, and because really, city council, you can put so much into it. There's never a shortage of projects that you can work on. So what's a little frustrating for me is that I just can't complete some projects, or I have to make priorities of what I can get done, because you do also have a family as well, and you want to have a certain quality of life. So it is sometimes difficult to balance, but we all manage it one way or another.
So you don't sleep as much, and you don't watch very much TV. I'm a lawyer by training and profession. I have a law firm in Boston, one of the founding partners, and it's tough at times. The benefit for me is that I'm really self-employed, and I have other people work with us, and so I have a lot of flexibility in my schedule, and that makes a huge difference. That makes this job easier to do. I think if I had a very rigid job during the day where I didn't have any flexibility at all, it would be much harder. You also have to have a pretty tolerant family that is willing to accept the fact that you're out at meetings 3 nights a week. And you got to be cognizant of that and balance that. That's actually something you see sometimes in political life that folks are not fully aware of. And you really do have to remember and carve out time. Make sure you spend time with your family members as well.
I didn't become a city councilor until after my children were out of the house and adults, but that's not the case with all of us. We had one of our colleagues just had a baby last week. And so another colleague is, I'm gonna guess he's in his 70s, and he's been on city council for 30 years. So we have young people, middle-aged people, and older people. For me, like Mark, I'm self-employed, so I can juggle it. I'm a landscape architect, so I do my work, I set my appointments, and then what time is left over, generally, goes to city council. But it's a balance of life all the time, just trying to figure out how to stay involved in the things you like, the types of things you have to do. I love that most of the city councilors are employed. I think that everyone brings their own perspective and professional expertise to the council. We all bring our professional experience to the job, and I think that really gives great perspective to the council members. But it is hard. Excuse me, I will say that I'm working a lot less at my job than I used to, hourly. But on the other hand, I'm at the point in my life, now that I'm older, that I get to make choices like that. So I would say I have advised other people thinking about running that if you don't have at least 15 hours a week, don't do it right now. And I would say it's often 20, 40, and more hours a week.
all right, one student asked, is being on city council a paying job, or is it just voluntary?
We now make $15,000 a year. That's right, 15,000. Yeah, we just got a raise. We used to make $8,900, and we now get $15,000 a year. It's a volunteer job.
It's about 69 cents an hour.
You can make a lot more money babysitting.
And I think this is going to be our last question, but what is something this will maybe not be our last question. What is something that you have accomplished as a council member that you are personally proud of?
I'll just say, one thing that drove me crazy is plastic waste and the plastic bags flying through the air and landing in our trees. And I was the council that initiated that. As a matter of fact, before I ran, I met with city councilors about the problem with plastic waste. And it's larger than just the plastic bags, but I was a leader on prohibiting plastic bags and also adding fee to paper. So you can take that as you will. Most people really like that, but some people don't.
I chaired the land use committee for 4 years, and during that time, we approved both the Austin Street and the Trio projects, which, if you recall, were very controversial, very difficult, and I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to guide them through successfully. I take a lot of satisfaction. Now, I also take satisfaction from smaller things. We just put in place an ordinance to govern last mile delivery services. And that was something I became interested in because I read an article in the Boston Globe. And I saw that and said, you know, this is going to be an issue for this city. It's not the most important issue that we deal with, but it's something we want to get out in front of, and we did. I will say as a public servant generally, probably the single accomplishment I'm most proud of is building this school. I think that was a huge accomplishment that involved a tremendous amount of effort across involving many people, and every single time I walk into this school, I'm proud of the fact that a lot of us put a lot of effort into building what I think is the exact type of building we ought to have for our students.
My accomplishments as a more recent member are smaller, I think, than some of my peers. But one I mentioned earlier, I'm really glad we just passed this, banning airgun discharging. I think it's part of gun violence prevention, and it seemed like a small thing, but it happened very quickly and very effectively. And I'm also glad to have been part of reviewing the historic preservation landmarking and demolition delay ordinances. Those might be terms that are like mind glazes, but it's about how to value effectively the role that historic preservation plays in all of the other kinds of change and development that a city has.
So I'm having a hard time coming up with one, but I'll give it just a squib of each. So the Austin Street project that Mark talked about, that was a project in my ward, Ward 2, and the three of us from Ward 2 started working on that project about 10 years before it actually passed. And I made a lot of enemies in my own ward supporting that project, but I didn't care because it was important enough to do what was right to get that project going. Another one that had happened early on in my tenure as a counselor was the Off-Leash Dog Ordinance. I don't know if any of you have dogs and take them to any of the 7 off-leash dog areas, but we didn't used to have any of those, and now we have 7, and we're still working on trying to get some more. The gun shop that we don't have, I feel pretty good about that. As soon as I found out about it from someone in Ward 4 who called me, we went right into action and we got an ordinance passed in time to prevent that gun shop from opening in Newton. And the last one I want to mention is that I'm working, because of my IT background, I'm working on building what we're calling a docket tracking database so that all of you can find out exactly what the heck we're doing and who's voting for it. Because it is unbelievably hard and not transparent right now to find any of that stuff. So hopefully by the end of this calendar year, we'll have that up and running.
All right, we have one last question, and it's a pretty easy one. You can probably tell when you answer it. But do you have, one thing we wanted to know, if you have to live in the ward that you are representing? Yes. All right, so.
Do you want to talk about the difference between ward and at large?
Oh yeah, does anyone want to talk about that briefly?
So we each have to live in our ward, but 2 of us from each ward are elected at large from people throughout the entire city. And for me, I'm at large, but I also feel that appointed at-large counselor. I care about all of the city, though I live in Ward 3, West Newton. The ward council, one from each ward, is elected only by people who live in that ward. Our votes are all the same, whether we're a ward council or at-large, whether we're a president or a mere newbie. One vote is one vote, but it's a little bit different and confusing about the difference between at-large and ward council. But yes, each of us has to live in the ward that we're elected to represent.
I just want to say that you guys have been a great audience. You seem to be really listening. I hope you really enjoyed it.
All right.
Since this is our last block, we just wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone who has helped put this event together. That's for everyone who's in Next Gen Voices, the Center for Civic Engagement, especially Terry and Claudia. Big thank you to them for helping us put this together. Thank you to all of our panelists from the City Council, School Committee, and Zoning and Planning Department. And I believe that is it.